My boss smirked when he told me I was just a girl. 5 years later, that smirk vanished the second he realized whose name was on his termination letter. My name is Rachel Martinez. To him, I was nothing, a disposable temp, a body behind a desk. Richard Blackstone, heir to a dynasty, armed with arrogance, made sure I knew my place. I still remember the supply closet, the smell of industrial cleaner, the flicker of the light above as he told me my career would end before it began. I walked out of that closet humiliated, trembling, but listening. I studied every word, every flaw, every arrogance he let slip. And while he believed I disappeared, I was building something bigger in the shadows. Tonight, in this glass tower, the tables have turned. Richard sits across from me, pen in hand, realizing the girl he buried is the woman ending his reign. Let me take you back to where this all started. 5 years ago, I was Rachel Martinez, fresh out of business school with a mountain of student debt and dreams bigger than my studio apartment in Queens. I'd grown up in a small town in Ohio, daughter of Maria Martinez, who cleaned office buildings at night and studied for her citizenship test by day. She'd scrub floors in corporate towers and tell me, "Mija, someday you'll sit in the big offices, not clean them." I believed her. God, I believed her with every fiber of my being. Blackstone Industries was my golden ticket, a Fortune 500 consulting firm that specialized in corporate turnarounds. When I landed a temp position in their accounts department, I felt like Cinderella getting invited to the ball. The office was everything I'd imagined success would look like. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble floors, people in designer suits talking about million-dollar deals over artisanal coffee. I wanted to belong there so badly, it physically hurt. My supervisor was Jennifer Walsh, a woman in her 40s who'd clawed her way up from secretary to senior manager. She saw something in me that I wasn't even sure existed yet. "You have good instincts, Rachel," she told me during my second week. "Have you thought about applying for the management training program?" The management training program. It was legendary at Blackstone, a 2-year fast track to executive status. Only 12 people got selected each year from hundreds of applicants. But I didn't know then that Jennifer was about to leave the company. I didn't know then that her replacement would be a man who viewed women as obstacles to be removed, not talent to be developed. That was just the beginning of how naive I really was. The day that shattered my world started like any other. I'd been working at Blackstone for 3 months, putting in 60-hour weeks and volunteering for every project Jennifer would give me. I'd prepared my application for the training program like I was applying to Harvard. Every comma perfect, every achievement highlighted. That Tuesday morning, Jennifer called me into her office. Her face was grim, and I could see boxes packed behind her desk. "Rachel, I'm leaving Blackstone. I got an offer I can't refuse from a competitor." My heart sunk. Jennifer was my champion, my advocate, the one person who believed I belonged in that marble tower. "But," she continued, "I've already put in a good word about you with my replacement. Richard Blackstone, yes, he's the founder's nephew, is taking over the department. I've left him detailed notes about your performance and potential." Richard Blackstone. I'd seen him around the office, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to prove yourself. He wore success like an expensive cologne, and everyone seemed to defer to him automatically. "He wants to meet with you this afternoon." About the training program. I spent my lunch break in the bathroom rehearsing my pitch in the mirror. I'd researched Richard's background, memorized his successful project, prepared intelligent questions about the company's strategic direction. At 3 p.m., I knocked on his office door, but instead of inviting me in, he gestured toward the supply closet across the hall. "Let's talk in there, more private." The supply closet was barely 6 feet square, lined with boxes of printer paper and cleaning supplies. The fluorescent light flickered overhead like a dying heartbeat. I should have known something was wrong, but I was so desperate to impress him that I followed him in without question. "So, you're the girl Jennifer has been raving about." The way he said "girl" made my skin crawl, but I forced a smile. "Yes, sir, I'm very interested in the management training." He held up a hand to stop me. "Let me save us both some time here, sweetheart." He leaned against the door, blocking my exit. "The training program is for people with real potential, people who are going to stick around for the long haul." "I understand that, sir. I'm committed to building a career at—" "Are you?" His smirk was sharp as a knife. "Because in my experience, girls like you'll work here for a year, maybe 2, then you'll meet some guy, get married, pop out a couple kids, and disappear to suburbia. Why would we waste valuable training resources on someone who's just going to quit?" I felt like I'd been slapped. "Mr. Blackstone, I can assure you that I'm serious about my career. I've worked 2 jobs to pay for business school. I graduated summa cum laude, and—" He laughed. Actually laughed. The sound echoed off the metal shelving like a gunshot. Sweetheart, I've been in this business for 15 years. You think you're the first ambitious girl who's walked through those doors? You're all the same. You want the corner office, the big salary, the respect, but you don't want to pay the price. You want it handed to you because you're pretty and you smile nice at meetings. My hands were shaking. That's not true. I'm willing to work for what? You think this is some diversity program where we hand out promotions to check boxes? This is a results-driven business, not a charity for girls who think they deserve success because they showed up. The walls of that supply closet felt like they were closing in. The smell of industrial cleaner was making me nauseous, or maybe that was the humiliation burning in my throat. Please, I whispered, hating how desperate I sounded. Richard stepped closer and I could smell his expensive aftershave mixed with something else. Contempt. You want to know the truth? You're not training program material. You're temp material. You're the kind of girl who files papers and answers phones, and maybe, if you're really lucky, gets promoted to secretary someday. That's your ceiling. He opened the door, flooding the closet with fluorescent light from the hallway.
Now run along back to your desk. The adults have real work to do. But I didn't know then that Jennifer had recorded her recommendation for me. I didn't know then that Richard had already decided to kill the training program entirely rather than risk promoting any women. I didn't know then that his cruelty wasn't personal. It was systematic. That was just the beginning of how deep his misogyny ran. The weeks after that supply closet humiliation were the darkest of my life. I tried to keep working, tried to pretend nothing had happened, but Richard made sure I knew my place. He moved me from interesting projects to data entry. He excluded me from meetings I'd previously been invited to. When clients asked for me specifically because of work I'd done, he'd assign the projects to male colleagues instead. Rachel's more of a support person, I heard him tell a client on the phone one day. You want someone who can really drive results. Support person, like I was office furniture. The worst part was watching the men around me advance. Jake Morrison, who'd started the same week I did, got promoted to junior analyst. Brett Collins, who'd been there a month less than me, was suddenly leading client presentations. It's just politics, my roommate Lisa said, over wine and takeout Chinese. You'll find something better. But it wasn't just politics. It was character assassination. Richard had poisoned the well so thoroughly that other departments wouldn't even consider me for transfers. We heard you might not be committed to staying long-term, the HR director told me when I applied for a position in marketing. Richard Blackstone mentioned you're probably looking to start a family soon. I wasn't even dating anyone, but somehow Richard had convinced the entire company that I was a flight risk, that investing in me was throwing money away. The final blow came during the Christmas party. I was standing by the dessert table, watching my male colleagues network with executives while I might as well have been invisible, when I overheard Richard talking to the CEO. The problem with hiring young women, Richard was saying, gesturing with his champagne glass, is that they're fundamentally not serious about business. They're playing dress up in the corporate world until real life kicks in. The CEO, David Chen, nodded thoughtfully. But some of our best performers are women. Sure, the older ones who've already had their kids, but these young ones, Richard shook his head, they're just marking time until they find a husband to take care of them. It's biology, not business. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my wine in his face and tell him exactly what I thought of his Stone Age opinions. Instead, I went to the bathroom and cried until my makeup was ruined. But I didn't know then that David Chen disagreed with Richard more than he let on. I didn't know then that Richard's comments had actually concerned him, not convinced him. That was just the beginning of how Richard's arrogance would become his weakness. 3 months later, my temp contract was up. Richard didn't renew it. No explanation, no feedback, no chance for improvement. Just a form letter thanking me for my service and wishing me well in my future endeavors. I cleaned out my desk on a Friday afternoon while most people were already gone for the weekend. 5 months of work, of dreams, of believing I belonged in that marble tower, all packed into a cardboard box that smelled like broken promises. As I waited for the elevator, Richard passed by with a group of male executives, all laughing at some joke I wasn't part of. when he glanced at me and my cardboard box, and I saw something flicker across his face. Not cruelty, not satisfaction, dismissal, like I was already forgotten. That night, I sat in my studio apartment staring at rejection letters from other companies. Word had spread in our industry. Richard Blackstone's opinion carried weight, and his opinion of me had made me unemployable. I was 26 years old, drowning in student debt, with no job prospects and a reputation I couldn't shake. I felt like I was disappearing, like maybe Richard had been right all along. Maybe I was just a girl pretending to be something I wasn't. But I didn't know then that hitting rock bottom was exactly where I needed to be. I didn't know then that the universe was about to send me an ally who would change everything. That was just the beginning of my real education. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was eating cereal for lunch because it was all I could afford. The number was unfamiliar, but I was desperate enough to answer any call that might be a job opportunity. "Is this Rachel Martinez?" The voice was crisp, professional, with a slight accent I couldn't place. "Yes, this is Rachel." "My name is Elena Vasquez. I'm the CEO of Momentum Capital. I believe we need to talk." Momentum Capital. I'd heard of them, a boutique investment firm that specialized in identifying undervalued companies and turning them around. They were small but aggressive, with a reputation for finding diamonds in the rough. "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong person. I don't have any connections to investment banking." She laughed, a sound like silver bells. "On the contrary, Ms. Martinez, you're exactly the person I'm looking for. I'd like to offer you lunch. Today, if possible." 2 hours later, I was sitting in a restaurant that probably cost more than my monthly rent, across from one of the most intimidating women I'd ever met. Elena Vasquez was in her 50s, with steel gray hair pulled into a perfect chignon, and eyes that seemed to see straight through to your soul. "Tell me about Richard Blackstone," she said without preamble. I nearly choked on my water. "I'm sorry, what?" "Richard Blackstone, your former supervisor. Tell me about your experience with him." I felt trapped, like this was some kind of test I didn't understand. "Ms. Vasquez, I'm not sure what you've heard, but I've heard plenty. The question is whether you're going to tell me the truth or try to protect a man who destroyed your career." Her directness was like a slap of cold water. For months, I'd been making excuses, trying to find diplomatic ways to explain why I'd left Blackstone, dancing around the truth because admitting what really happened felt like admitting failure. "He told me I was just a girl," I said quietly, "that I wasn't worth training because I'd just get married and quit." Elena nodded like this confirmed something she already knew. "And how did that make you feel?" "Angry, humiliated, like maybe he was right." Was he right? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. "No," I said, and for the first time in months, I meant it. No, he wasn't right. Elena smiled, the first warmth she'd shown since I'd sat down. "Good, because I have a proposition for you, Miss Martinez. I'm launching a new division of my company focused on corporate restructuring. I need someone hungry, someone smart, someone with something to prove." She slid a business card across the table. "The salary is $60,000 to start, with performance bonuses that could double that, full benefits, tuition reimbursement for your MBA if you're interested, and unlimited growth potential." I stared at the card like it might disappear if I blinked. "Why me? You don't even know me." "Actually, I know more about you than you think. Jennifer Walsh, your former supervisor, she works for me now. She's been singing your praises for months, trying to convince me to poach you from Blackstone." Jennifer, my champion, the woman who believed in me when no one else would. "She left me detailed reports about your work. Your analysis of the Morrison account saved Blackstone $2 million, though I doubt you got credit for it. Your restructuring proposal for their logistics division was brilliant. Again, implemented without acknowledgement." My head was spinning. "How do you know all this?" Elena's smile turned predatory. Because, Miss Martinez, I make it my business to know when talented people are being wasted. And I have a particular interest in companies that systematically undervalue their female employees. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Richard Blackstone thinks women like you are disposable. I think you're the future of this industry. The question is, are you ready to prove him wrong? But I didn't know then that Elena had been watching Blackstone Industries for over a year. I didn't know then that she'd identified them as an acquisition target, that she was building a team specifically designed to take them apart piece by piece. I didn't know then that I was being recruited not just for my talent, but for my intimate knowledge of their vulnerabilities. That was just the beginning of Elena's master plan. Working at Momentum Capital was like being plugged into an electrical current after months of feeling dead inside. Elena didn't just give me opportunities. She demanded excellence and provided every resource I needed to achieve it. Within 6 months, I'd closed 3 major deals and was leading my own team. Within a year, Elena was my right hand, the person she trusted with her most sensitive projects. And her most sensitive project, I learned, was Blackstone Industries. They're hemorrhaging talent, Elena told me as we reviewed financial reports in her corner office. Specifically, female talent. Their turnover rate among women under 30 is 80% higher than industry standard. She pulled up a presentation I'd never seen before. This is what I've been building toward, Rachel. Blackstone is ripe for a takeover, but not because of their financials, because of their culture. The slides were devastating. Exit interview after exit interview from women who left Blackstone, all citing the same issues: lack of advancement opportunities, hostile work environment, systematic exclusion from leadership development. Elena, I said slowly, are you planning to buy Blackstone Industries? Her smile was sharp as a blade. I'm planning to save Blackstone Industries from itself. Over the next 18 months, Elena taught me everything she knew about corporate warfare, how to read between the lines of financial statements, how to identify weak leadership, how to build coalitions of investors who shared your vision for change, but most importantly, how to document everything. In this business, she told me, your reputation is your weapon, and the best way to build a reputation is to be the person who is always right, always prepared, 2 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. I became obsessed with being right. I studied market trends, analyzed competitor strategies, built financial models that predicted industry shifts months in advance. When I presented to clients, I didn't just give them solutions. I gave them prophecies that came true. By my 3rd year at Momentum, I was managing a portfolio worth $500 million. By my 4th year, Elena was talking about making me a partner. But I didn't know then that Elena was grooming me for something bigger than partnership. I didn't know then that she'd been planning to retire and hand me control of the entire company. Most importantly, I didn't know then that Blackstone Industries was hemorrhaging money, that their clients were fleeing to competitors, and that their board of directors was quietly looking for new leadership. That was just the beginning of how perfectly all the pieces were falling into place. The opportunity came on a Thursday morning that started like any other. Elena burst into my office with a newspaper and the grin that could have powered half of Manhattan. Rachel, look at this. The headline made my heart skip. Blackstone Industries reports 3rd consecutive quarter of declining revenue. Their biggest client just pulled a $50 million contract. 3 more are threatening to leave. Their stock price has dropped 40% in 6 months. I scanned the article, feeling something between triumph and nausea. What does this mean for us? It means, my dear protégé, that the board of directors is meeting next week to discuss new leadership. And it means that Momentum Capital is about to make them an offer they can't resist. Elena's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Momentum would acquire controlling interest in Blackstone Industries, not through a hostile takeover, but through a merger disguised as a rescue operation. Elena would become chairman of the board, and I would become CEO. You want me to be CEO of Blackstone? I felt dizzy just saying the words. You're ready, Rachel, more than ready. You've built a track record that speaks for itself. You understand their business better than they do. Hell, you used to work there. And most importantly, you represent the future of corporate leadership.
She handed me a thick folder. This is your transition plan. Study it, live it, breathe it. In 2 weeks, you're going to walk into that boardroom and convince them that you're not just their best option, you're their only option. The folder contained everything: financial projections showing how female-inclusive leadership improved bottom lines, case studies of successful corporate turnarounds, detailed analysis of Blackstone's current problems and my proposed solutions. But buried in the appendix was something that made my hand shake: a section titled Executive Performance Reviews, Richard Blackstone Department. It was devastating. Client complaints about Richard's management style, HR reports about discrimination lawsuits that had been quietly settled, employee satisfaction surveys showing that his department had the lowest morale in the company. "Elena," I said, looking up at her with something like awe, "how long have you been planning this?" Her smile was enigmatic. "Since the day Jennifer Walsh told me about a brilliant young woman who was being wasted in a supply closet." The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Elena coached me on boardroom dynamics, brought in consultants to help me refine my presentation, and even hired a stylist to help me project the right image of authority. "You're not just selling them a CEO," she told me as we rehearsed my pitch for the 100th time. "You're selling them a vision of what their company could become." The night before the board meeting, I couldn't sleep. I stood at the window of my corner office. Yes, I had a corner office now, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere out there, Richard Blackstone was probably sleeping peacefully, unaware that his world was about to be turned upside down. But I didn't know then that Richard had spent the last 5 years systematically alienating every powerful woman in the industry. I didn't know then that 3 of the 6 board members were women who'd been watching his behavior with growing concern. I didn't know then that my reputation had preceded me into that boardroom, that Elena had spent months telling influential people about the brilliant young woman she was mentoring. That was just the beginning of how thoroughly the tables were about to turn. The Blackstone Industries boardroom was exactly as I remembered from my dreams and my nightmares. 20 floors above the streets where I used to catch the subway to my temp job, surrounded by oil paintings of dead white men who'd built the company's legacy. Elena and I sat on one side of the mahogany table, facing 6 board members who held the power to transform my life with a single vote. At the far end of the table, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world, sat Richard Blackstone. He'd aged in the 5 years since I'd seen him. His silver hair was thinner, his expensive suit couldn't quite hide the paunch around his middle, and his eyes had the desperate look of a man watching his empire crumble. When he saw me walk in, his face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and finally pure panic. "Good morning, everyone," Elena said, her voice commanding the room's attention. "I'd like to introduce Rachel Martinez, CEO of Momentum Capital's Restructuring Division, and your proposed new Chief Executive Officer." Richard's voice cracked like a teenager's. "Wait, what? This is the girl who used to temp here? She's nobody. She's the woman whose department has generated $2.3 billion in revenue over the last 3 years." Board member Patricia Chen interrupted. "Please continue, Miss Martinez." I stood up, and for a moment I was back in that supply closet, small and powerless and ashamed. Then I looked at Richard's face, really looked at it, and saw not the intimidating authority figure from my nightmares, but a scared man who'd built his career on keeping people like me down. 5 years ago, I sat in this building as a temporary employee with big dreams and bigger determination. I was told I wasn't worth investing in. I was told I was just a girl who would inevitably quit to get married and have babies. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That experience taught me something valuable. The most dangerous assumption a leader can make is that talent comes in only one package. While Blackstone Industries has been hemorrhaging female talent, companies that embrace inclusive leadership have seen 25% higher profitability. I clicked to my first slide. This is Blackstone's current employee satisfaction data. Women are leaving at twice the industry rate. Your Glassdoor reviews specifically cite boys' club mentality and lack of advancement opportunities for women as primary concerns. Board member James Sullivan leaned forward. What's your proposed solution? Complete cultural overhaul, starting with leadership accountability. No more promoting managers who can't retain diverse talent. No more excluding women from strategic discussions. And no more tolerating executives who view half the workforce as disposable. I clicked to my next slide, showing financial projections. Companies with female CEOs outperform their peers by 15%. Companies with diverse leadership teams are 70% more likely to capture new markets. Blackstone has been leaving money on the table for years. This is ridiculous, Richard burst out. You can't just waltz in here with some PowerPoint presentation and think you can run a Fortune 500 company. You have no experience with... I have experience with your clients, Richard. I clicked to a slide showing client retention statistics. Morrison Industries, Peterson Group, Hartwell Corporation. 3 of your biggest accounts that left in the last 18 months. Want to know where they went? They came to Momentum Capital. To me. Because they were tired of working with a company that didn't value innovation or fresh perspectives. I looked directly at him. They were tired of working with a company led by people who thought half the population wasn't worth their time. Patricia Chen spoke up. Miss Martinez, what would be your first priority if appointed CEO? I smiled, and it was Richard's nightmare come to life. Executive performance review. Every department head will be evaluated on their ability to develop talent, retain employees, and drive results. Those who've been coasting on old boy networks and outdated thinking will be replaced by leaders who can actually lead. Richard's hands were shaking as he reached for his water glass. You can't do this. I've been with this company for 15 years. I have institutional knowledge, relationships, experience. You have a sexual discrimination lawsuit that was settled out of court for $2 million, Elena said quietly, sliding a folder across the cable. You have client complaints dating back 3 years. And you have the worst employee retention rate in the company. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Richard's labored breathing.
The question, I continued, looking around the table at each board member, isn't whether you can afford to make this change. The question is whether you can afford not to. But I didn't know then that the vote had been decided before I even walked into the room. Elena had spent weeks building consensus, addressing concerns, and positioning this as not just a rescue, but an opportunity. I didn't know then that Patricia Chen's daughter had been passed over for promotion at a competitor because she was too young and pretty to be taken seriously. I didn't know then that board member Michael Torres had 3 daughters in business school who'd inspired him to think differently about gender and leadership. Most importantly, I didn't know then that the company's largest institutional investor had already committed to support the merger, contingent on modern, progressive leadership that reflects 21st century values. That was just the beginning of how completely Richard's world was about to collapse. The vote was unanimous, 6-0 with 1 abstention, Richard himself, who sat in stunned silence as his career imploded in real time. Miss Martinez, Patricia Chen said with something that might have been admiration, welcome to Blackstone Industries. Your first day as CEO is Monday. That brings us full circle, back to where we started, back to that conference room 20 floors above the city where Richard Blackstone was signing his termination papers with hands that shook like autumn leaves. "This isn't personal, Richard," I said, though we both knew that was a lie. "This is business, the kind of results-driven business you always claimed to value." He looked up at me with something between hatred and disbelief. "You've ruined me. No one will hire me after this." "No," I corrected gently. "You ruined yourself. I just gave you enough rope." The truth was, I had offered him options: a consulting position with reduced responsibilities, early retirement with a generous severance package, even a transfer to our international division where he could finish out his career quietly. He'd rejected every offer, demanding to stay in his old position with his old authority. He couldn't accept a world where the girl he dismissed was now his boss. "Your last day is Friday," I told him. "HR will coordinate your transition. Your replacement starts Monday." "Who?" he asked bitterly. "Jennifer Walsh. You remember her. The woman whose judgment you questioned when she recommended me for the training program?" The poetry of it was almost too perfect. 6 months later, Blackstone Industries posted record quarterly profits. Employee satisfaction scores hit company highs. Our diversity initiatives were featured in Harvard Business Review as a model for industry transformation. I kept the supply closet where Richard humiliated me, turned it into a meditation room where employees could go when they needed a quiet moment to regroup. There's a plaque on the door that reads, "From small spaces, big dreams grow." Sometimes I stand in that room and remember the girl I used to be, the one who believed she was just a temp pretending to be something she wasn't. I think about how Richard's cruelty, intended to break me, actually forged me into someone stronger than either of us could have imagined. Last month, I got a LinkedIn message from a young woman who just graduated business school. She'd heard me speak at a conference and wanted advice about dealing with a boss who kept telling her she wasn't leadership material. I invited her to coffee. Over lattes that cost more than I used to spend on groceries, I told her what Elena had taught me, that other people's limitations are not your limitations, that someone else's failure of imagination doesn't define your possibilities. "But what if he's right?" she asked, echoing the question that had haunted my darkest nights. "What if I'm really not cut out for this?" I smiled and handed her my business card. On the back, I'd written the same words Elena had written on my first Momentum Capital contract: "Prove them wrong." 6 months later, she was promoted to senior analyst at her company. Her former boss, still stuck in middle management, still wondering why all his best people keep leaving for competitors. Some people say revenge is a dish best served cold. I disagree. The best revenge isn't cold. It's transformative. It's becoming so successful, so undeniably excellent, that your former enemies become footnotes in your success story. Richard Blackstone taught me that I was just a girl. He was right, in a way. I was just a girl with more determination, more vision, and more capacity for growth than he ever possessed. Today, when young women ask me how I made it to the C-suite, I tell them the truth. I succeeded not despite being underestimated, but because of it. Every door that was slammed in my face taught me to build my own doors. Every person who said I couldn't taught me to prove them wrong. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm working in my corner office with the city lights twinkling below, I think about Richard Blackstone. Not with anger anymore, but with something approaching gratitude. After all, without his cruelty, I might never have discovered how powerful I really was. The best revenge, it turns out, is living so well that your enemies become irrelevant. Some girls grow up to change the world. Others grow up to run it. I did both. And that's how a single smirk in a supply closet turned into the downfall of an empire. Richard Blackstone thought he was untouchable, but arrogance blinds, and underestimating the wrong woman cost him everything. What began as humiliation ended in transformation, proof that the best revenge stories aren't about anger. They're about justice, survival, and reclaiming power. Rachel's journey is a reminder that betrayal can fuel greatness, that every dismissal can spark a comeback. This isn't just a tale of revenge. It's a story of resilience, empowerment, and the brutal poetry of turning weakness into a weapon. If you're drawn to shocking revenge stories, dramatic betrayals, and thrillers where justice is served cold, this is only the beginning. Subscribe for more tales of obsession, downfall, and ultimate payback. Because sometimes the most gripping stories aren't fiction at all.